Just before the episode gets underway, I want to take the chance to ask you to support Reimagining Cyber by following or subscribing to the podcast. Also, if you can, why not leave us a rating and a review? It really helps other cybersecurity-minded folk find us. So follow, subscribe, rate and review. Now on with the show.
Hello and welcome to Reimagining Cyber. I'm Rob Aragao, and we're diving into the fascinating world of the future and what it means for cybersecurity. You've probably heard the term futurist, but what does that really mean? How do futurists actually anticipate what's coming? And more importantly, how can those same techniques help us prepare for tomorrow's security challenges? Well, to explore this, I'm joined by Heather Vescent, a professional futurist, researcher, and strategist. Heather has spent her career tracking trends, mapping possibilities, and helping organizations think differently about what lies ahead. From the future of money and digital identity to the impact of AI and emerging technologies on cybersecurity, Heather brings a unique perspective that connects foresight with real-world security challenges. This is going to be a conversation about curiosity, creativity, and practical ways to prepare for what's next. Heather, so being a futurist, talk to me. What's it all about? Like, how would you define a futurist?
So to me, like a futurist is both like an artist and a researcher. So you have to be kind of both creative and analytical. And you have to be analytical because I think it's about, at least for me, tracking trends, understanding what the future could be, seeing what is happening in the present moments, which, you know, we can say, oh, what is cell phone adoption? Or what is AI agents adoption, or where are they on the hype cycle or stuff like that. But you need to be able to push them out into the future. And I think one of the other things that's really important is you need to know yourself, because we all have biases. We've all been brought up in the world from our own perspectives. And unless you spend a lot of time kind of unpacking where that comes from and your biases and your understanding, those are going to come up like unconsciously in your futures and what you think is possible. And so that's one of the reasons why I think it's really good for futurists. Well, I think futurists who go through like the kind of academic or professional training to be a futurist are better because they're aware of their biases. I mean, we're all going to have biases. Being aware of those so that they don't influence the future in a way or how you see the future in a way that you don't want it to be, I think that's really important. One of the other reasons why I think it's really important to kind of like go through some training to be a futurist is that, one, there's a ton of different processes and methodologies. You can, of course, like read about them and learn them like on your own, but putting them into practice, it really does change who you are. And for me, one of the kind of concepts that really changed my thinking about what was possible with the future and how I kind of thought about things was this system of how you categorize human development, and it's called spiral dynamics. And it's very complicated. It basically has like, hey, humans develop along this type of way, from like surviving to having a leader to following rules to meritocracy. But the thing that was so interesting is like after they hit like the peak of like this like evolutionary spiral, then there was like this gap and it shifted into a second tier. And in that second tier were people that believed that like all the possibilities below the tier were still possible. Like when you're in meritocracy, you're like, oh, meritocracy is the way to go. Or when you're in bureaucracy, you're like, everyone's got to follow the rules. You know, everyone in that tier one is like, if you're not following the ways that our society is running, the way I think it should be done, yours is wrong. But when you're up in that second tier, you're kind of like, oh, you see that like all these people have these diverse different ways of how they see the world. And that's the reality of it. You know, like the world is made up with lots of people, with some people like bureaucracy,
Sure.
Some people like meritocracy, and there's really no bad or good with either of those. So it really kind of helps me become more comfortable about exploring the future and being creative and curious. And that helps me be more realistic and see truly what the future could be versus like me project what I think it should be.
Right.
I do have things I think it should be, but I put those aside
Sure, of course.
when I do that work. So that's kind of a long-winded futurist. answer.
No, I mean, it sets the stage, right? Because people are going to come into listening and being, what's this futurist thing all about? One, two, why is Rob talking about this for a cybersecurity podcast, right? But that's where we're going next. So talk a little bit about where your kind of initial areas of focus were as a futurist. And then what was that pivot point, right? What happened that transitioned you to basically say, let me put some really good, solid energy and thought process around what's happening in the realm of cybersecurity?
Yeah, so I didn't set out to want to be a futurist. I started my career in Silicon Valley working in tech, and I kept finding myself working for companies that were like ahead of their time. So they got a business, and then like maybe 5 years later, the same idea would come back up and like, boom, be big. And I was like, oh,
Yep.
oh, oh.
Been there, done that. Yep.
Right, like a lot of us are early adopters. And so I was kind of like, well, what can I do that kind of sees that as like a benefit, like that I can lean into my intuitive attraction to the future things and not like lose out on it. And I was talking to someone and they were like, oh, you're a futurist. And I was like, what's that? Because I was like, no idea. And anyway, that's how I started my journey to become one. There are a couple of different pathways people take when they decide to become a futurist. Some people just change their title and start practicing. I really wanted to be the best I could be. So I went back to school and I got a master's in science and strategic foresight. And I was working for a kind of fintech company at the time. And so as I was like going to school at night and working during the day, I wanted to pick a project that I could look at that was kind of relevant to the work I was doing. And so I decided to look at the impact of technology on the financial system. And that was in 2010. Right when Bitcoin came out and cryptocurrencies, and we were looking at like alternative economic models, and we had like Airbnb and the sharing economy. And so the very beginning of my career as a futurist looked at the future of money, payments, and transactions. And that was very interesting. I spoke a lot and advocated for that. And as anything, the future happens and then it continues going on and evolving. I had also always been very active in the digital identity space from when I was product manager in tech, and I was always curious about it. And I met a friend at one of these events, and he ended up being part of this new security paradigms workshop, which is a workshop that explores kind of like far out security stuff before it kind of hits the mainstream. It's very academic. Anyway, in 2018, their theme was security in 2038, which was 20 years ahead of the time. So we knew each other from the identity space. And so we were like, hey, let's team up and look at the future of cybersecurity or future of security in 2038. This was me pairing up with my friend, Bob Blakely. He's a security guy. I came and brought all my foresight methodology. And it really was an opportunity for me to kind of like, oh, let's just put this through the process and see how it applies to cybersecurity. And we were both so surprised with the results because we came up with 12 new scenarios and 12 new paradigms, which were like one of the paradigms that we came up. And it was at that time in 2017, we used usernames and passwords. And the kind of new paradigm we were envisioning was, well, what if we can authenticate without using passwords? Which that was a crazy idea back then. And I've always been attracted to technology and how humans interact with technology. And the more I started like digging into the security realm, the more I just was like so curious of how we could apply this strategic foresight tools and ways of thinking to anticipate the future vulnerabilities, future attacks, future things, because it's so like we're just getting hammered, So
Right.
That was me kind of wanting to like, I'm not like a hands-on like technical person, but I do know enough to be able to say, hey, these are ways that some concepts and some ideas that you might be able to apply to potentially anticipate so that, if you anticipate an attack or something might be in this area, you can kind of maybe shore that up, which will give you more capacity to address the attacks that none of us can anticipate. And that's kind of my motivation.
And I think that's important in the way you're describing it, because what you're starting to do is kind of stitch together applications of strategic foresight into cybersecurity problem areas, if you will.
100%.
Right? Take a step back for the audience to be aware of, right? Because a lot of them, again, are going to be cybersecurity folks, and they're going, what's this strategic foresight thing that Heather's mentioned a couple of times? Just take a step back and kind of paint that picture for them as to really what that's all about.
Well, you asked me like a question here is like, how do you explain strategic foresight to someone in cybersecurity? And the picture that I always get is it's a Star Trek metaphor. You're there, you're Captain Kirk, and imagine being able to see the Klingon ship decloak before everyone else.
That's the analogy.
That's what it teaches you to do.
So it's the thinking like a bad guy approach, in essence, that we've applied in cybersecurity for a while. And you were talking about that a little while ago as far as some use cases, right? How can I think about what's coming next so that I can put the right protection mechanisms in place to prevent that from happening, in essence, is what I'm hearing as an example.
Yeah, because here's the thing. If you put together these scenarios about the future, you could have explored the different variables and how the future might be. Now, the future's never going to happen exactly the way these scenarios outline them, and that's not the purpose of them. The purpose is for you to be familiarized with it so that when you are faced with it, you already kind of have a pre-reaction. You're able to identify it faster, which means you're able to react faster, respond faster, and in some cases, you might even have like some tools that you can kind of bring in and use it versus having like, I don't know, not having any of that planning, Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Completely. And that's what I was going to say, because you're again, from an audience perspective, right? Many people are like thinking about it from a cyber perspective. And you just painted the picture very optimally, which is, I'm trying to think through again, what could potentially be happening to what I'm trying to protect for my organization as an example. And I paint all these different scenarios. So what's key is that, like we talked about before, we're going to look for where there are the best ways to apply protection mechanisms or schemes to obviously prevent something from happening. But we all know in cybersecurity, things are going to happen. Something's going to get through, period. So then you went on to say, sure. So what you need to be thinking about is when something like this may happen, maybe not exactly the same, but similar, I already know how to react. I already know how to kind of run my playbook on how to recover from a scenario like that. And that's the frame of thinking, in essence, that you're applying here is that approach, which again is, I think, extremely relevant, especially this day and age, right? So that takes me to the next question, which I know you and I kind of chatted a little bit about previously, which is, here we are in the world of AI. More importantly, here we are in the world of agentic AI. You're hearing about this. You're talking about this. Like, just paint the picture of, how do you see this as key influence within the cybersecurity realm next?
Yeah, so this is great. I actually did a keynote last week on future-proofing the age of agents, which is agentic AI. And let's just take a really constrained thing. Let's just take like a constrained situation. So one of the big dreams of the future of agentic AI is digital employees. Okay. So if we extrapolate down to the future and say, okay, by 2028, we're all going to have digital employees. So let's just take one cybersecurity variable, attack surface. How are digital employees expanding, reducing, influencing, changing the attack surface, right? So minimally, they're potentially going to be their own attack surface. How are people going to be trying to manipulate or otherwise influence or make a digital employee do something bad, give up credentials, say things they're not supposed to say, right? Let's role play these scenarios. Let's think about like how, if we're going to have digital employees, how people, threat actors and bad guys might try to abuse them and use them in ways, because we're going to do that. So, and then once you can identify what some of those problems might be, you can start to solve those problems today, which doesn't necessarily mean you completely, secured future digital employees, but it does mean that you have explored the potential new attack surface of it, have identified ways you can maybe mitigate or address potential future threats today, which hopefully will close off some areas so that if some new thing comes in, which, of course, some of the most creative folks in the world are threat actors and hackers, then you've at least got like part of it constrained and covered. So that's kind of a very particular specific example when it comes to agentic AI in the future. I think two of the other cybersecurity variables I really like to look at are attacker effectiveness and defender effectiveness. So you can look at using agentic AI in both specific scenarios inside your company or how you might want to use it. How can this support or augment your defense teams, your tracking or your analysis or things like that? So you're looking at it how does it support? It increases your defender effectiveness versus it's also at the same time going to potentially increase attacker effectiveness. I think at least with AI, we're seeing that with deep fakes and the ability to have more robust, more deep fakes with more fidelity, making it harder for people to kind of suss out whether it's real or it's not real. Those are just a few ideas, right, that off the top of my head that I've been kind of thinking about.
Well, that actually plays a pretty strong role or key use case as it relates to how agentic AI can and will, in my opinion, empower the way we actually run red team and blue team exercises today, as an example.
Yeah.
That does exactly what you were just describing. It's an application for it where it enables more effectiveness on, how they go about their scenario testing, how we go about, obviously, hopefully stopping them as part of the exercise process. And that's a great way to be able to scale and support that. That touches a little bit on what's going to be part of this great book that you have coming out. So maybe take a minute to kind of discuss the Cybersecurity Futures Playbook that you're working on now. The key, I think, at times is also understanding the balancing act in cybersecurity of how we deal with technology, we deal with how to protect an organization, and we have to deal with how we actually properly communicate the effectiveness of that to deliver business outcomes. And I know you're kind of straddling that across your conversations and interactions you're having every day, and especially in the work that you're doing in this new book. So maybe talk a little bit about what's to come.
Yeah. So for a long time, I've wanted to build on the work that we did in the Shifting Paradigms paper, which is really kind of just maybe a proof of concept. And whether that's with workshops, I mean, at that point, that paper is really theoretical. And I have really wanted to see people like you and security professionals take that and apply it in their own organizations. And I think it would have a great result, but I've not actually seen that. So as a researcher, I'm real curious. So I want to put together this playbook that both educates kind of about the strategic foresight from that type of language, but translating it in a way so that it can be understood and applied by security professionals. Giving you a little bit of background, I have come up with, a lot of different cybersecurity variables, which are ways to think about. I mentioned the attack surface, attacker effectiveness, defender effectiveness, variables that you can turn the knob up and down. So going into each of those different segments of variables, how you can watch them, adjust them, apply some of them to the cybersecurity future sections. To be honest, the purpose of this book is really to write something that is practical, that can be applied and understood by security professionals. Because my mission is I want to help you guys secure things better. And I have these tools and technologies and experiences, and I think that you guys can really use them for your benefit. And part of writing this book is me figuring out how to translate my language of strategic foresight and what I know into the language of practical playbook execution, tabletop game, that type of stuff for security professionals. And I like to tell a good story. There are lots of good stories in security. And so I hope it'll be a fun read. It'll be educational, and it'll give some easy to use exercises that people can try in their own organizations. And then I hope people come back and tell me, did this work or didn't it work? Right? I'm really curious.
Yeah, the feedback's important for sure. But I think the way you've been describing things, right? For me, and the way you also describe what your plan is to implement within this book is to enable cybersecurity professionals in a way where it takes that strategic foresight that you well understand how to apply towards having them enable it for their day in, day out activities for cybersecurity, right? So I think, that's really the key aspect is how do we start thinking differently? And you being an expert in that realm and applying it to cybersecurity really can help make a strong difference within this space. So I'm really looking forward to the book and having you back on to discuss when it's ready to roll more about your stories, because that's what it's all about, is understanding kind of the applicability of, different examples we walk through in our conversation today. So Heather, I appreciate you coming on. I think it's a very interesting perspective that you're bringing to the forefront. And again, we're excited to see more and hear more from you in the future.
That's awesome, Rob. I appreciate that. My whole goal is to just help you guys see that Klingon ship decloak before anyone else so you can stop them. That's really my goal.
That's a perfect analogy. Love it. Thanks again.